Good morning everyone, really good to see you. My name's Nick, I'm a trustee of Norwich Pride. We think it's really important that events like this happen at Pride, that we discuss what the issues are and we plan the way forward, we plot and plan. So this is the first of two events we've got this morning. So the first one is the Natasha Curson Trans Talk. Remembering, of course, Natasha Curson, who was a great contributor to Norwich Pride, particularly over the first few years. And then following that, at 11 o'clock, we've got question time. So please do come to both if you can, or just one if you have to as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Andrew, who's going to take us through this.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and it's also an incredible pleasure to have these lovely people on stage with me. I will do you a quick introduction. So, on my far right, yeah.
It's unfortunate. Hello, I am Ell Folan. I am a freelance data journalist, or it's what I've done for the last few years. I run this thing called Stats for Lefties, which apparently some people have heard of, which is neat. And I am non-binary. I've been at Hours non-binary for the past 11 years. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm sorry. No, he's speaking into microphone, so excuse me a bit. I'm Mel. I'm a trans woman, pronouns are she, her. In 2012, I was one of the first trans women to qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales. I spent most of my career in the public sector, and I'm currently a senior lawyer for a local authority, I won't say which one, fairly close to here, where I work in commercial and governance.
Excellent. And if you'd like a little bit of backstory about me, I run the Trans Advisory Group. I also do various bits around the city, singing in some LGBT choirs, doing some acting, a little bit of activism, that kind of whole general pleasant bag. So if we jump straight into the questions, great. So first I have down, the CAS report was a review and report of recommendations regarding gender identity services for children and young people. It's been largely welcomed by the media, NHS, conversion therapy supporters and spokespeople for Conservatives and Labour Party, but heavily criticised by medical practitioners, scholars and trans community organisations. What would you say the problems are with the CAS report regarding its methodology, claims and recommendations? Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Look, the first thing I think is important to say is that I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not a science matician. But what I can say, sorry, I'm trying to hold this close without speaking too much into it. What I can say is that multiple international medical organizations and studies have said this is bunk, and that its recommendations rely on cherry-picking studies that they want to see and excluding ones that they don't want to see. One of the things that was most notable from it was that one of the requirements to be included as a credible study for sourcing is that it was in English. Now, I don't know about you, but in my experience, most of the people around this planet do not speak English. So excluding everything that's not written in English seems to me to be extreme malpractice on the part of academic study. But what I can say about the CAS report's recommendations and kind of the point of it is that fundamentally, in terms of the actual outcomes from it, what's written in it isn't really that important. It was created as a document for politicians like Wes Streeting and Victoria Atkins to be able to point to and say, look, what we want to do is justified because we have this hundreds of page report that clearly must back up what we say, because no one in the media is going to read it, no one in the average public's going to read it, we can just say it says whatever it wants. Case in point, it doesn't say that puberty blockers should be banned for everyone, as a matter of course, but that's exactly what Victoria Atkins did, it's exactly what Wes Streeting is doing. As far as actual policy outcomes could go, it could be blank. The main issue that I think we should take with it is hammering home relentlessly that this was a partisan report commissioned by a Conservative government that deliberately put someone in charge of it who they knew would deliver the outcome they wanted, and rather than engaging with it as some sort of serious academic report written by a neutral arbiter, we should be treating it for what it is, which is just a bunch of baloney, and regarding it as fundamentally illegitimate unserious, and rather than trying to get its recommendations implemented, we should simply be calling on Labour, as the new government, to just disregard it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I actually was really quite sad when the report came out. I actually took the time to sit and read it. And again, I'm not a medical professional at all, but I'm a lawyer. And one of the things that we really place a lot of importance on is evidence. And the evidence was so skewed in the report that I think, to us it was obvious. The way in which it was written and the perspective from which it was coming across was just appalling. There was just a sincere lack of evidence, and we know that that's the case because the medical profession more widely, and sorry, I meant to say at the start of the introduction, I'm also a member of UNISON. I'm a shop steward at UNISON, and I'm also co-chair of the UNISON LGBT committee. And we, obviously, health is one of the sectors that UNISON represents, and we know that at the very tops of hospitals, certainly in this region, that there's a lot of support for us. And there are many people at the top of those organisations who are saying, we are just going to treat this as guidance, we're not obliged to follow it. And I think that's really, really important. Because if you've got the medical professionals at the top saying this is a sham, then that's the most important thing, because it's the best way of pushing back against the content of the report and making sure that people see it for what it actually is, which, as Ell said, is it's a sham, it's bunkum. And that's really it in summary.
You really have to ask yourself, who on earth asked for this? Because it certainly wasn't trans people. What people have been asking for decades even is more access to healthcare, not less. More resources into gender identity services, not less. More access to it for people quicker, not slowing it down. The only people who've asked for this are social conservatives and the right-wing media, who have used trans rights as a wedge issue to try and drive a massive divide in British society. And that's all this report said.
All evidence does point to it being just a deliberate attack, like a tool that people can use to beat us with, regardless of any kind of legitimacy that a study could have had. So on that note, the report was executed by a woman with no specialist in the subject in any way, shape or form. She had been actively sourced for this role. She was the only candidate considered to execute this report. So what can we do to promote genuine studies and run damage control against anti-trans lobbying?
I think damage control is a wider issue, because it's so hard, because as a community we don't have any agency. We are not backed by the likes of J.K. Rowling with infinite millions who can support every legal campaign against us going. I mean, fortunately, I don't know if anyone heard this week, but Alison Bailey's claim against Stonewall was thrown out on appeal, which was a fantastic piece of news.
Oh, that's sad.
I know, so sad, my heart bleeds. Because J.K. Rowling very publicly said how much money she'd given towards Alison's court case. So to have it fail spectacularly was quite nice to see. Gives you a bit more faith in the law, really. So yeah, in terms of damage limitation, I think if we can isolate the CAS report and just there's no point trying to engage with it, because it is what it is. It's out there, and they will try and spin it and rely on it as much as they can. So I think what's really important is building up a narrative that, rather than attacking the report, almost marginalise it to a degree, so that you take some of the sting out of it and take some of its kind of punch away. Because all you're left with then is an opinion. Everyone's full of opinions, aren't they? And I won't use the quote about how opinions are like body parts, but everyone's got one.
Here's the thing. You know how many reports are issued by government every single year and just get left on the shelf? I mean, there's so ridiculous number of reports, but governments choose which ones support that particular agenda. I'm reminded in particular of the report that was written in advance of raising tuition fees in 2010. And I remember that the opposition made a lot of hay out of the government raising those tuition fees, but that report had been commissioned by the outgoing government and it would have been followed, I'm sure, because they also wanted to do it. But there were, there's also a dozen other reports saying don't do it or do a different thing, and they were ignored. So to answer the question overall, to me, one of the most important things that our community leaders and organisations need to do with regards to these reports, I realise I'm only looking at you folks, I look at other people too, is delegitimise it. When the recommendations came out, and indeed throughout the process, you had organisations like Stonewall, even mermaids, welcoming it as some sort of great advancement in the field of trans healthcare. Now, personally, I consider that an act of surrender, but I can appreciate the motives were an attempt to engage positively with something that was still going to happen. But that just legitimizes it. If you have, for example, and this has happened so many times, if you have a documentary made by a television company that's all about trans healthcare or trans rights, and it's 90% transphobes and TERFs and gender critical people, and there's one trans person, then someone's going to watch that documentary and think, oh, well, it was balanced. It must have been balanced. They had someone else on to give a different perspective. But if that program is boycotted by everyone in the community, they do not have someone who can provide a token voice to legitimize it. And so even if it gets broadcast, people are going to watch it and think, oh, this seems a bit one-sided. I'll only really think about this alongside other views. But you include even one voice legitimizing the report, then people consider it a serious document. And I personally think that it was a real mistake for groups like Stonewall to treat this as some kind of serious thing to engage with and to welcome it and say we need to implement it. Terrible, terrible idea. What people should have done with it and what they should do with it now is say, just pick up this report and toss it in the bin. You're a new government. You don't need to do what the old government did. There's the whole point of a general election.
One thing I've also noticed is that in the media, one of the very first things they resort to is adding in like a reference to the Cass report whenever there's anything that's trans critical. So, for example, I think a couple of weeks ago there was a protest at the UEA, and the EDP, who I've got absolutely no respect for at all, published an article saying how it was trans activists who were masked up and they were complaining about the Cass report. And it's like, you know, you're conflating two different issues. The protest at the UEA was a protest against a fascist group. The Cass report had nothing to do with that. So, you know, using it, leaving that sort of report in to try and weaponise an issue, I think is despicable.
Well, that's exactly the thing, right? It doesn't really matter that much to, it matters to us what it says, obviously, because what it recommends is bad. But in terms of its use as a political weapon, it doesn't really matter what it says. It just matters that it exists. It matters that it's a nice formal thing you can point to and say, hey, I'm going to do something regarding trans rights and trans healthcare. Oh, by the way, it's justified by the Cass report. And no one in the media is going to read it. No one in the average public is going to read it because they've got better things to do than read it. How many hundreds of pages was it?
Yeah, very long pages.
Yeah. Than something which, I mean, there was one section in it. What was it? You may remember this better than me. That talked about how playing with certain toys made you like more predisposed to be a gender. And I was like, what is this? This is the kind of thing you read on 4chan. This isn't serious academia. This is written by someone who has no idea what she's doing and who has just been picked because she's going to regurgitate the most right-wing nonsense possible. And to treat this as some kind of serious medical document is just a massive failing by our community.
I think the other dangerous thing as well about the Cass report is that there were some recommendations, and there are only a few, that on balance you'd look at and think, okay, yeah, that's a recommendation that has sort of some validity to it. But that good, small as it is completely undone by the rest of the report, which, as Ell said, is just so ridiculously biased. I mean, it's the kind of thing you expect to see written by some of the 1970s. Like, who's that guy, Money? I've forgotten his name now. A chap called Money, who used to write a load of rubbish stuff about trans people. Thank you, John Money. So the language that was used about us, it was language and terminology used about us, was just so outdated. And I think again that just re-emphasised where the report was coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very reminiscent, as we all know, of Section 28, and it does lead to some concern about how things might continue to descend for us. But we'll cover that at the end if we've got some spare time, shall we? So, as we mentioned, despite the Cass review not recommending it, one consequence was that the decision of Victoria Atkins to ban puberty blockers, putting both trans and cis children in danger, and West Streeting is obviously going to hold up this ban. So how can we apply pressure effectively, particularly when Streeting will meet with anti-trans groups, but not with us?
I think it should be important to emphasise he hasn't banned it for cis children. No, cisgender children can get puberty blockers as easy as they could before. Much like, cisgender people can get HRT over the counter really easily as they could before. It's just trans people, which is interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if we're a certain group that needs to be singled out for particularly harsh treatment. But as to the point of the question, fundamentally, there has been this tendency amongst groups, favourable, progressive groups, to treat the Labour Party and the Labour leadership with kid gloves. Be very soft, kind, calm, politely lobby them behind the scenes. If you ever come out and say anything publicly, it's comradely, it's signed off in solidarity. I'm talking about LGBT Labour here. And I just have to ask ourselves, what has that gotten us? It's taken us from 2017, when we had both major party leaders committed to self-ID, Conservative and Labour, to now, when we have a Labour leadership and a health secretary, a gay man, who is rolling back LGBT healthcare. What has the softly approach actually achieved? To my mind, there are two things that we need to be willing to do if we are to actually make these people sit up and listen to us. The first is a slightly long-term thing, because we've just had an election, but in the longer term, we need to be willing to withdraw our support from these people. I am minded to be reminded of what has happened in the past week with regards to Labour policy on Gaza. They have withdrawn their objection to the arrest report for Netanyahu. They look likely to ban weapons sales, or at least some of them. And it is incontestable to me that a big part of that is that they lost 6 seats to pro-Palestine candidates and Greens. They lost hundreds of thousands of votes. Wes Streeting nearly lost his own seat to someone running on that platform. So did a bunch of other cabinet members, especially some in Birmingham. In Birmingham, one person did lose their seat. And that shifted policy. And I think there was a genuine, a sort of general disinclination amongst the queer community to do that in this election, and I think it cost us, because it wasn't just Muslim voters who withdrew support from Labour, it was their allies, it was their friends, it was their family, it was their supporters, people who supported Palestine and people who supported those policies. And if we are pushing for that kind of thing, we're more likely to get the attention of people like Streeting, because these people respond to power. But that's the long term, as I said. The second thing is to be more confrontational, to be, quite frankly, rude. And I wanted to express my gratitude to Norwich Pride for being willing to stand up to Labour and say, your banner's not welcome because of what you've done. Because what these people respond to is social pressure. They want to come to Pride and be welcomed and be hugged and be given all the accolades and all the praise that they got before. They want to be able to portray themselves as champions of the queer community, even as they rip away our healthcare and ban talking about us in schools. And our determination has to be to stand up to these people and say, no. You don't get to do that. You don't get to treat us like crap and then get us to worship you. If you want support from us, if you want love from us, you have to give us what we want. And I don't trust the people in government. I don't really trust many politicians. What I do trust is for them to respond to the fear of losing power and influence. And if you offer up the possibility that these people are going to lose their seat, lose their power, they will respond. They will not respond to a softly approach of people writing to them like LGBT Labour have done and saying, please think about this. Please rethink this. We won't tell you to stop doing it. We love you. Solidarity. That didn't work.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that the last couple of months, I've been working on something at work with a barrister called Jason Coppell, King's Counsel, who was the lead on the challenge to the ban on puberty blockers that was being heard at the High Court last week. And I didn't realise he was actually involved. I've been instructing him for months, and he didn't mention it. He did mention he was busy, but that probably explains why. But he said, something interesting that he said was that as a result of the litigation, and what happens within the litigation process is there's quite a long, complex process of disclosure and discovery. And he said that one of the key things that came to light was that the legislation was forced and based on very little consideration against the advice of civil servants, with what we know to be very dangerous consequences for vulnerable teenagers and their families. And I think that really just shows the arrogance, I think, of the politicians who've disregarded the advice from civil servants. And don't get me wrong, I'm kind of a local government civil servant. We're not all perfect, we don't always get things right. But we are generally the ones day to day that have the knowledge and the subject knowledge of what we're dealing with. And for them to completely disregard that advice and just proceed, you kind of have to question, well, where is this coming from? And going back to the point that Elle made as well about the fact we don't stand up enough for ourselves, I still can't understand this day and age why members of our own community put themselves out and going on TV shows and trying to portray themselves as a reasonable side of our community. No, we should be going on and being a bloody pain in the arse. We shouldn't be just sitting there being grateful for being given a seat at a table that doesn't even want us there in the first place.
There's always going to be some people in a community who want to be seen as the reasonable people, especially when the community is as big as ours. But we just need to be very, very clear on insisting you cannot legitimize these reports and these programs and these things which are specifically designed to target our community, turn us against each other, and take away our rights. Like, you're not helping by engaging with these things. The only way to help when you're contacted by someone like the Cass report or a documentary that wants to make a documentary on trans people has been made by some company that's done really transphobic ones before, is just say no. No, not going to do it. Because believe me, they hate that so much. I've seen so many things where documentary companies are trying to contact trans people, or the BBC is trying to call up people to debate a transphobe, and people just keep saying no, 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 no. And it's just the rising frustration is both funny and very good, because the BBC can have on a transphobe to just rant on about stuff, but fundamentally, if they're just up there by themselves, it sounds like someone ranting about the moon being made of green cheese, or the king being a lizard, because that's what these people believe. But you put them up against someone who sounds reasonable, it sounds like you're equating the two. And if you don't allow them to do that, then their opinions have to stand on their own, and they look very silly.
And you say the king's not a lizard?
No,
Disappointed.
oh, I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah. From my experience, having participated in a documentary before, I would not recommend it. It was awful, horrible, exploitative experience, and was one of the most stressful times of my life, and something I regret deeply now.
No, it's okay. Well, this is the thing, is that I understand exactly why people do it, which is that they think, if I don't do this, we're going to be betrayed horribly. We're going to have no one to stand up for ourselves. And also, you know, a lot of people in our community are very kind, generous people who assume the best of the motives of the people who are interviewing them. And unfortunately, I am extremely cynical, and I don't trust anyone, especially after the last few years. But I do admire people who are not like that, because I kind of wish I wasn't. So that's why I offer that advice, not because I think people are silly for engaging with documentaries, but because it's just not good for their welfare or for other people. It's not a good decision, but I understand it.
And I think in fairness as well, I think now, with the benefit of hindsight, we know what the agenda is, and we know where these documentary makers are coming from. Whereas I think a couple of years ago, when the sort of, you know, I hate using the word debate, that's what they're trying to turn us into. When that first kind of surfaced, I think there was a, you know, it was, well, we simply just didn't know the wider agenda, but now things have become clearer as a result of Cass and other things, and I think, you know, it makes it much clearer that we shouldn't be getting involved at all.
I couldn't agree more. But moving on to the next question, because we are swiftly running out of time. As we briefly touched on, if trans subjects are banned in schools, that doesn't prevent people from delivering accurate education outside of the school system. So how might we achieve that?
I think it's going to be a difficult one. I mean, some of us will remember the dark days of Section 28. And so Section 28 came about, I don't know if people are aware, but it came about because there was just a general obligation on local authorities not to promote homosexuality. And God forbid, if they ever try and bring something back in like that again, there will be a huge, immense pushback, certainly from the unions as a start. And we'll be fighting tooth and nail to stop that. And I think in terms of what we can challenge it outside of schools, I think that's where communities really need to step up and play their part, because there's a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge out there. and there's a wealth of people with backgrounds in education and training that can put together a counter-narrative. And I think that's the best way of ensuring that young people, because most of all, fundamentally, this has got to be about supporting trans youth and not leaving them behind. And that's a danger if you have this sort of blanket ban on it in schools. It's, well, where is the support going to come from? Organisations like Mermaids are not going to be able to do it by themselves. It's going to take a bigger effort.
One thing I'd say that advantages us in the current present in a way that wasn't possible in the 80s and 90s with Section 28 is that we have this. We have the internet. And I do not think it's surprising that in this very context we have politicians pressing for under 16s to be banned from phones and banned from the internet, banned from social media, because the more that you take away the ability to learn about queer identities in schools, the more those people turn to the internet to find out those very things instead. And that is exactly where we can teach people about things like that. But it's also possible to do what you were saying, I think.
Excellent, yeah. I'm sure all of us here have been harmed by the lack of education in schools when we were growing up. I certainly had real negative consequences from it. And all we really want is just somebody to support us and say, you're not weird, you're not wrong. It's okay to just exist and be happy and, grow as you should, rather than the way everyone else thinks that you should. So, what lessons can we learn from the past in Section 28 that we can apply to this? Like, specifically, what can we do to prevent the eventual slide into just constant prejudice? Too much of a loaded question?
No. So one of the things I would say is that one of the things that helped accomplish the repeal of Section 28 was reaching beyond just our community to other organisations and progressive groups. Talked about unions before, it's a very good point. Unions today are far more inclusive of LGBT and trans people than they were in, say, the 1970s. And that is a direct result of engagement, support, solidarity between LGBT people and trade unions. That's an important lesson to learn from it. And I have no doubt that as this government pushes further down the path of its own version of Section 28, there will be pushback from unions. There are some people in the labour movement I'm not particularly enthused by, but I do trust people in the trade union movement because they have shown and proven that they have solidarity with us. And I think the other thing that we have to learn from it is that even if a government seems friendly on paper, they still need to be challenged and confronted, because otherwise they will wait and run out the clock, as we saw with the last one. So I always like people to remind people of this. Labour came in 1997, won a landslide majority, pretty much the same as they have now, and they didn't repeal Section 28 until, I think, 2003, which was after they'd won a second thumping landslide majority. And they could have done it from day one, and they didn't. And in the end, it took a Liberal Democrat, the current Liberal Democrat leader actually, to push that forward for it to actually happen. And that was only going to be possible because people were constantly hounding the party in government to actually get it done. And that is the kind of thing we need to be doing now and in the future, and to me that's an important lesson to learn.
Yeah, I think as well, it's difficult at times because we, as a community, we at times can be quite disparate, and we can be quite spread out, and where there's lots of sort of concentric sort of friendship groups and circles, and really, we need to kind of come together more, I think, as a unified voice, and challenge everything that stands against us, because that's where we haven't really done ourselves justice in the past, I think. Because it's always going to be difficult when you're up against politicians. I mean, I have to be careful what I say here. I'm a huge supporter certainly of the local Greens, because whenever there's been an event here in Norwich, we've had Green councillors, on occasions being assaulted, standing by our side. And I wouldn't expect apart from one exception, I can't think of anyone from Labour at the moment I particularly trust to stand next to me at a protest. And that speaks volumes. And it's about, I think really we've got to have a think about, is this the time that we can actually come together and try and affect change and try and come together more as a unified voice and make a protest before things get worse?
Coming together as a community does seem to be the only thing that could possibly work. Although I sometimes am struck by the vibe that sometimes we are so afraid of doing anything wrong that we're too afraid to do anything right. And sometimes you just have to look bad. You have to do the things that are unfavourable and will get you a bad reputation if you want to make any kind of real impact. So if we still have time, I will speed across to the last question. One more, okay. And leading on from what we were just talking about, what do you consider to be the problem with moderates and where we're lacking practical support from?
Try and answer it quick.
Yeah, very quick
brief question.
I'll be very quick on this one if that's okay. I mean, there's nothing worse than plastic allies. When I say plastic allies, I mean people that melt when things start to get too hot. I've seen that, unfortunately, I've even seen that, in a local authority setting where councillors have been able to get away with quite appalling comments on Mumsnet, and the view has been, we can't challenge them because we have to be neutral. No, bollocks do we have to be neutral? Excuse my French. Why do we have to be neutral in the face of oppression? We should, we didn't choose to make ourselves a political issue. They've weaponised it against us. We have every right to stand up and say, no, we're not taking this.
Okay. Over the past few years, the leadership of the Labour Party and the party as a whole, which is now in government, has descended into the gutter of transphobia, and at every single stage, moderates, both LGBT and cis and straight, have said to me, it's nothing to worry about. They're just playing it up for the cameras. They're just doing it for the right-wing media. And every single time they have swallowed it and nothing has been done, and it has gotten worse and worse and worse, and now it has gotten to the unedifying, horrible, horrible situation of queer people campaigning for a Labour Party which was openly saying, we're going to strip rights away from trans people, we're going to ban trans women from healthcare wards, we want to keep trans people out of toilets that are a chosen gender, and they justified it to themselves. They justified that to themselves. They watched them say this stuff and said, yeah, I can vote for that. And to me, that has been the most unedifying lesson of the past few years, is realizing that for a lot of people, there's always something more important than us. There's always going to be something that's more important than our welfare, than our well-being. And until these people are shamed socially into admitting that and confronting that reality, they're not going to change. To me, it's the fundamental problem with moderates and people who consider themselves to be reasonable, is that they'll always find some reason to justify backing atrocious, disgusting things. And the past few years have been extremely upsetting with that regard. But I do think that there is scope to make these people feel ashamed of what they have stood for. And as I said, Norwich Pride saying, no, Labour not welcome until you actually do something for us. Great start. Perfect way to respond to it. And by the way, I should stand up and say that our Labour MP, Clive Lewis, has done exactly the kind of thing I would want him to do. He's been one of only a handful of MPs to come out and say the puberty blocker ban is wrong. It's not acceptable. And whether he's done that because he is a strong believer in that, which I think he probably is, or he did it in response to pressure, to me, it doesn't matter. That's exactly the kind of thing I want. I think people up and down the country should be saying to their Labour MPs, why are you backing this? Why are you not objecting to it? And if you don't object to it, you can say goodbye to not only my vote, but my support, my love and adoration. You aren't welcome at Pride, you aren't welcome at any of our events, until you give us what we want.
Exactly. And on that powerful note, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. I hope everyone feels a bit more empowered to make a proactive change and, get involved in supporting trans rights, basically. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Let's give Andrew and the panel a big round of applause. Thank you. And I want to take this moment just to thank Andrew for the work that you do all year round for Norwich Pride as part of the Trans Advisory Group and the many other hats that you wear. So thank you very much to everybody that spoke. I thought that was really interesting and helped us hopefully go forward with whatever happens with the cast review. Who knows? Can we also, before we have a little break, just thank our signer, Donna, please?